Dadhood. Modern Dadhood podcast.
It's that time again.
It is it?
What's up, dude?
Oh, Adam, I'm happy to see your face, my friend.
Do your kids say bro or bruh?
One of my kids says, I have a hard time even pronouncing it the way that he pronounces it, but he says, bruh.
It's French. There's like an X at the end.
Bruh. He says it all the time.
Oh, does it make you crazy?
Makes me a little bit crazy. I do think it's hilarious when he says, mommy, bruh.
I'd be cool if my kids said it like to be funny once in a while, but my 8-year-old sometimes just drops it mid-conversation or trying to get our attention or whatever. Yeah, I'm not down with it.
And it's very like bruh and not bro.
Mm-hmm. Bruh. Yeah.
How about that? Those kids, man.
Just one of those things. It's 2025. I got to get used to it.
I think you just got to get used to it. You know.
Oh boy. Well, how about this podcast?
How about this podcast? Modern Dadhood.
Yeah. Well, tell them all about it.
Modern Dadhood, the parenting podcast, which is an ongoing conversation about the joys, challenges, and general insanity of being a dad in this moment.
And insanity. Insanity is a good word for it.
It is. My name is Marc Checket. I'm a dad to twin boys who are 7 years old.
And my name's Adam Flaherty, and I'm a dad to 2 young women, strong, powerful daughters who are 11 and 8.
And exploring the usage of the word bruh in their everyday vernacular.
Exactly. Among other words and phrases.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Adam, before we get into this, you don't mind if I enjoy a piece of Boston cream pie while we record, do you?
I hope that you'll do that.
One sec.
Oh, I'm so jealous. I haven't eaten sugar like that in weeks.
Oh, really? I'm sorry. You know it's good.
It looks good. It sounds so good.
You know it's good when you put the second fork full in your mouth before the first forkful is gone from your mouth.
Well, and that is a great segue to the topic of this episode, which is all about food. We've got a guest coming up. I had an awesome chat with professional chef David Nayfeld, who told me all about his upcoming cookbook that's available for pre-order. That's great recipes that you can create for your kids. He talks a lot about encouraging your kids to be part of the process of cooking and how that can be a really nice experience and a good way to involve them and prepare them for the future and to take some ownership over the things that they're cooking. We can just wait. We'll all wait for you. We'll all wait for you.
Did you tell him about how healthy of an eater I am?
So that chat will be coming up shortly. But before we get to that, I think that we should just give our listeners, especially maybe new listeners, just a quick rundown of what this is all about.
Well, this show, as we've said in the opening, is an ongoing conversation. But what does that mean? That means you and we don't just sit here with microphones in front of our faces and yap.
And twiddle our Boston cream donuts.
Oh, God, I love Boston cream, man. But we interview folks from all over, man. Dads from all walks of life, we like to say.
Listen, the last thing about this podcast is that all the episodes are available at moderndadhood.com and anywhere else that podcasts can be found. Just search Modern Dadhood and follow us on social. And for those who are new to the podcast, you'll get a quick feel for it as soon as you start listening. And I hope you like it. If you do, please tell a friend. So anyway, we've got an awesome episode centered around food. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the food habits in your house and just what mealtime is like. And because I know my situation is can be very frustrating, but I would love to hear how dinner time goes at your house. Are your boys picky eaters? Are they adventurous? Is it chaotic mealtime, or is it, nice kind of focused, sharing stories? Tell me about it.
Well, so, we have 2 children. One of them is quite picky when it comes to food. And The other one is I think I would say adventurous, especially by comparison, right? He's to his brother. He's very adventurous. That being said, he doesn't have he doesn't exactly have the most sophisticated palate. But what has happened in our household, I'll just talk about dinner for a second. What has happened in our household is that we've kind of gotten to the point where we're tired of getting into arguments or fighting or having to deal with meltdowns around dinner.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is dinner is usually a mishmash of something that Jamie and I will eat, something that the one picky eater will eat, and maybe even a third thing for the other kid.
That must be laborious and time consuming.
I really don't like this situation that we're in. And it falls, it falls a lot on Jamie because our jobs, we both work largely from home, but my job is such that I'm on phone calls, kind of glued to my computer, like all day, all the way to the very end of the day. So yeah, it's laborious and it mostly falls on her, which is just a bummer. But like I said, the alternative, and once in a while we'll just, hey, this is what you're getting. Put whatever food in front of them. And it really is a bit of a fight every time.
Does it get emotional?
Oh, yeah.
And what happens when they just are not interested in eating that? They're like, I don't like this. I'm not going to eat it. Is it just you say, well, this is what's for dinner, and then they don't eat it, and then you spend 20, 30 minutes, you and Jamie eating, and then at the end of the meal, their plates are still full and their bellies are still empty, and you have to then say, okay, well, go get yourself some cereal or something.
Yeah, a lot of times. And sometimes it does sort of result in like, okay, fine, so that you can have some yogurt then, Yep. But I kind of hate that too. I kind of hate that too. We made a meal.
Right.
They're only 7. So I can't go too far into, it hurts me to know that we are wasting food through this process.
Totally. Especially when things are so expensive and then you have to watch. I mean, we've talked about this before, but scraping it into the trash can after you've not only purchased it, but then spent time preparing something that's healthy and well balanced to then have to throw it away is fucking agonizing.
Absolutely. And and then just bigger picture world problems that exist out, and knowing that some people don't have the good fortune of being able to cook a meal and throw it right in the fucking garbage.
Right.
And so that burns me every time. Yeah. And it's frustrating because sometimes the meal is like a chicken patty sandwich.
Yeah.
And buttery, cheesy rice, and it's like
the most delicious comfort foods that nobody has, unless they're a vegetarian or vegan, right? Yeah. No kid has the right to say, I don't like this.
It's a little confounding because it's like mashed potatoes. Nope. Spaghetti. No. Cheeseburgers. No. Like they just keep going down the list of things that are traditionally, I would categorize as kid-friendly food. Not exactly health food.
Yeah. My 8-year-old is the same way. So my 11-year-old daughter, several months ago, decided that she wanted to be vegetarian. And it came, I think that some of her friends were experimenting with that. And she got this idea that she doesn't want to consume animals. And we talked about it a lot. And Sarah and I fully support her in trying this and also let her know, if you decide you don't want to be a vegetarian anymore, there's no shame in that. That's totally okay too. And this is a healthy thing to try. So we are already making separate things for her. Usually it's just swapping out one thing for a animal protein for a vegetarian version of it or plant-based or something. Not a huge deal. But my 8-year-old is so picky. It drives me nuts, and it's always throwing stuff away, and it's always playing the game of she knows if she can just ride it out for while everybody else is eating, she'll be able to get something else because we want her to be fed. And it's a real challenge trying to open her mind to trying new things or even revisiting things that she's liked in the past, but for whatever reason decides right now she doesn't like it.
And there's that whole, this is what I've heard from like, I don't know, whatever, like some books that I've read, even doctors. It's like, put the food that you want them to try and get used to, whatever, in front of them, but always give them something that they like.
Mm-hmm.
And
you can't add mac and cheese to every plate.
Well, that's, first of all, that's the one. Yeah, that's mac and cheese for some reason is still okay.
Right.
It's still on the list. But you're right. You can't make mac and cheese every night of the week and always serve it. And the bottom line is that there hasn't been a single, and I'm not being hyperbolic, like there hasn't been a single instance where he's even so much as looked at the other food that's on his plate.
Yeah.
If it's like sandwich with some chips and, you know, like a fruit, something or other, it's like chips. Going to go right to the chips.
Oh, yeah.
Probably going to eat only the chips. And even if I give like 3 chips, it's like I'll eat the 3 chips and then just go hungry.
Yeah.
I'd rather go hungry than try the other things.
Yep. How about dessert? Are they always like, my girls are also like sugar fiends.
Oh, yeah.
And we talk a lot about, you know, everything in moderation, but they are always thinking about when the next hit of sugar is. And, you know, not necessarily how quickly they can get through their dinner, but like if I eat this much of my dinner, again, like my 11-year-old who's a vegetarian has a good appetite. And so she'll clean her plate, usually no problem. My 8-year-old is like, did I do good enough to have, you know, whatever, a Girl Scout cookie? It's
right.
like, no, we gave you pretty small portions and gave you the amount that we expect that you should eat. And it's always this negotiation, even down to like the last things on her plate. It's like, you know, there's 3 green beans. Like, if I eat one of them, can I have dessert? Mm-hmm. No, you got to eat all 3. And then we get down to the last one. And it's like, what percentage of it does she have to eat before she can have a popsicle or whatever it is?
Right.
It's like, it's just so maddening.
I hate the negotiation situation. We get into it a ton. And honestly, there's a lot of instances where the less picky of the 2 sons will eat everything on his plate, ask for seconds of stuff, and be done eating and get up and say, can I have a dessert? And Jamie and I look at each other like, yeah, sure. You just ate a fantastic dinner. Yeah, go grab yourself some Sour Patch Kids or whatever. He likes gummy things. And that will not entice the other son to do anything different.
Is he okay if he doesn't get dessert?
Yeah. And it happens like a lot.
I guess in some ways that's not a bad thing, right? As long as he's not like, it would be much worse if he was not eating his dinner and then melting down and that he couldn't have dessert because his twin brother did.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's not usually that. I just think it just blows my mind that son number 1 is sitting here with 2 kernels of corn on his plate, refuses to eat it. And that's all potentially that could stand between him and a bowl of ice cream.
Right.
And across the table is kid number 2, just slurping up a bowl of ice cream.
Yeah. Yeah.
In his face. And it doesn't, I think I told this story before, but just the quick version was I decided to dig in one night and say, you're not going anywhere until you try some carrots. It was carrots. And I started by saying like a spoonful. You need to eat a spoonful. That constitutes trying something.
Sure.
And the fight was epic and it went on. And to the point where I was relenting and saying, eat one. And one is not one carrot. One is a tiny piece of a carrot because they're all chopped up in, you know, to little bits and then whatever. And they're smothered in butter. They got a little brown sugar on them. Yeah. Like they're delicious carrots. Okay. And the battle goes on. My other son, long done, has taken a bath, is in PJs upstairs doing whatever with mom. And I'm still down at the table with my legs crossed, just sitting there staring at my son, who eventually puts his head down in like exasperation and honest to God falls asleep at the table. He put up a fight the whole night until he fell asleep with one lone teensy weensy carrot in front of him.
So in that situation, who won the battle and who won the war?
I don't know.
The war is still ongoing.
The war is ongoing, and I guess he won the battle.
I mean, there was stubbornness on both sides there.
Oh, yeah. And that's rare that I would do that.
Oh, sure.
But in this instance, I was like, I'm going to try this tactic.
Yeah, test it out.
And I'm going to see how it goes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure there are a lot of parents who listening who are dealing with these same things. And I'll tell you, chatting with David Nayfeld was pretty enlightening. He's got some great ideas for ways to involve your kids and a lot of ideas for how to make foods or recipes more enticing. Anyway, it was a great chat, and I see no reason we shouldn't just go ahead and play it back right now.
I am excited to hear this one because we struggle.
You're going to learn stuff. David Nayfeld is a professional chef based in San Francisco who's worked in some of the best kitchens in the world. He's a single dad with a 6-year-old daughter, and he's on the verge of releasing his new cookbook, Dad, What's for Dinner? David, it's so great meeting you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Typically like to start off just by asking a little bit about dad life. What's awesome? What's challenging?
I think probably most of your listeners are dads. So every hour that I could answer that question differently. There's good days and there's challenging days. I'm also fortunate that in our house we call them bonuses. So I have a bonus son, and my fiance, as she likes to say, has a bonus daughter, and it's really cute. They kind of started it. My Elena and Vanessa kind of started the bonus mommy, bonus daughter thing because they were trying to find language. With her son, there's not so much of an issue. He's 14 years old, right? So it's very well defined. I'm David, right? Like, and that works for him.
Yeah.
And that works for me, right? Like, and we found our way with that fairly easily. But, when Vanessa got into Elena's life, she was 3 years old. So finding language for that was a little bit more challenging for her, and trying to find something that felt comfortable for her. So right now we're in the era of bonus. So it's bonus mommy and bonus daughter. So I think that works well. But going back to the question that you asked, it's interesting, right? Like, I've had my daughter, and then now I kind of have this vision of the future with our son Nico, and seeing what that kind of how that plays out. And obviously there's differences between boys and girls, and every individual is different, but just kind of seeing how those different things materialize, but for me, I think being a dad is probably one of the most gratifying things I've ever experienced, probably the most gratifying thing I've ever experienced, and probably why it's so frustrating. If you can't get your kid to eat breakfast, it feels like a indictment of your entire quality of parenthood.
Yeah.
Which really kind of is silly to say, but you get wound up like that.
What's the dynamic like? It sounds like it's a couple of years in now, but between Elena and Nico.
He's 14, right? And his desire to be actively involved with a 6-year-old is waning, right? When he was 11, when we all first kind of got together, it was a little bit different, right? Like there was maybe a little bit more interest in just having someone in the house. Now at 14, right? Like, with the video games and things like that, he doesn't get as much of his attention as maybe she would want. But today there was like this incredibly sweet interaction where he's leaving the house for school. His mom is getting ready there, and he's outside already. And Elena had woken up just a little bit earlier today so she could finish one of her crafts. And she's on the sofa finishing her crafts, and she yells from the sofa like, "Bye, Nico." And like normally Nico would pretend like he just doesn't hear her and be like, yeah, whatever, spaz. But like today, he actually yelled back from the car like, "Bye," and that was very, and I know that's such a silly thing to like capture, but in that moment, I think both Vanessa and I were like, "Oh, wow, that's something he wouldn't normally do." And who knows, maybe that's the future, you know?
Yeah. Maybe we're turning a corner. Yeah.
Yeah. But each day, each half of a day, each quadrant of the day, it's different. You got to kind of take it as it comes.
I want to get into chatting about your book. I feel like with a lot of our guests, like, we spend some time talking about family. We spend some time talking about what they do professionally. In the case of your book, these two things like weave together really nicely because you do weave in these great stories and anecdotes throughout, in and among the recipes, which I think is a really cool part of the layout. And we can kind of touch on that a bit later. But I wonder if you could maybe just give our listeners a little elevator pitch for the book, like what inspired the book, Dad, What's for Dinner?
Yeah, I mean, what inspired it was I was a very busy chef working every day in my restaurant, and my daughter was born. I was not married to her mom. We were in this like one bedroom apartment, and that relationship was frankly kind of never gonna succeed, right? Like even during the process of her being pregnant, right? Like that was something that I think was very clear was not set up for success, right? And when our daughter was about a year old, that's kind of when the pandemic happened, and her mom was working in tech at the time. So basically, the only thing that left changed in her life was she was working from the other room rather than going to work. For me, I mean, my restaurant shut down. We started feeding people free meals. It was like basically it became a soup kitchen overnight. And once I kind of got that going over the first couple weeks, I didn't need to be there for most of the day, because also we were trying to keep people employed.
Yeah.
And then also there was spatial constraints. You didn't want too many people in one space. I'm not trying to bring people back to the pandemic. And I was there, and basically it was like, cool, here's our 1-year-old. You've got to basically be the caregiver from, when the moment she wakes up at like, 6 a.m., whatever time that is, to later in the afternoon when I would go to the restaurant and start like handing out free meals, which was like close to like 4:30. Right. So that's like basically when you're like 1 year old, that's pretty much your entire day. And so for me, a lot of it kind of came to my mind after the first couple of weeks. I started thinking to myself, like, a lot of caregiving is so similar to being successful in a kitchen, which is like creating a plan, prepping in advance, cleaning as you go, cooking in batches, knowing what the next like 3 things you're going to do are. And I think a lot of people's minds are not trained to work that way just because they don't work in professional kitchens, i.e. when you go to someone's house and they're cooking, what I perceive to be like a very simple thing, yet like the sink is full of 30 different utensils and dishes they've used, cabinets are open, refrigerator doors are open, there's just everything all over the counters. And what ends up happening is people get discouraged from cooking because the cleanup is so challenging, right?
Yeah.
And then just the job becomes arduous, right? And especially when you're a caregiver, you're like, hey, I'm cooking to clean, to feed someone, and then rinse and repeat. By the time I'm done with it all, it's time to do it again. And so for me, at the beginning of the book, it was just like, hey, I wonder if people would be interested in how chefs think about caregiving and cooking for people at home. And so that kind of morphed over time. So like imagine this was already, 5 years ago when the seed kind of popped up. And so I started to put together a pitch for the book. And throughout that time, I separated from my daughter's mom and I started getting set up on my own. And I didn't have any legal custody of my daughter. I didn't have overnights or anything like that. And really my time with her was limited for a long time to seeing her for 2 hours twice a week. And so her mom had moved like 45 minutes away. So I had to drive 45 minutes, pick her up, hang out with her in a park. I couldn't drive her back to my place, be with her for 2 hours, and then I'd have to drop her off and I'd have to feed her dinner in that time and then drive 45 minutes back. And the thing is, during this entire process, right, it's this game of like feels what a game of gotcha is, because if you like fail to feed her, if you fail to show up, you fail to be on time, you fail anything, they use that as like an indicator as to like whether you're ready for more time.
Yeah.
And so you're going through this like purity test. The motivation then for the book became very different, which was, okay, well, I've got to leave the house. I got to have, and this is, keep in mind, this is now a 2.5-year-old. I've got to have a bag full of clothes to change her from and everything like that. I got to have a bag full of things to keep her attention, crafts, toys, books, all that stuff. And then I have to have a separate bag full of snacks, meals, everything like that, basically ready to go. And so I throw it all in my truck. I drive the 45 minutes. I'd pick her up from school. We play in the park. Then I'd open my truck bed and we'd sit on the truck bed and I'd feed her dinner. I'd have like parents walking by me looking at me like, why are you feeding your kid on the bed of a truck? And, that was that. And so during that era, during that kind of season, that was the motivation for the book, which is like, how do you get food and pack it and take it to go and like kind of be on the go? How do you effectively do things that will hold? So then a year later, right, I'm still working on the book. I'm writing the recipes. I've sold the book. Somebody wants to buy it, but I'm like still writing it. But now I have some overnights with my daughter. And so at that point, it's a different season. Now it's like I've got time with my daughter. I still have limited time. And so she's in the house and I'm realizing I'm like, look, I could either have her in another room right now while I'm cooking to feed her and not spending any of that time together. And so the thing that really popped in my head, and I think this is really what like crystallized the book, like, and what you end up getting the most of in the book, which I'm the most proud of, which is if you really want to be engaged, you need to be doing this stuff together. Mm-hmm. And if you want your kids to be willing to try new things, if you want your kids to participate, if you want your kids also to be good helpers, all that stuff, you have to kind of like be willing to get them in the kitchen and deal with the outcome, right? Like, when they're younger, it's like, oh, I dropped this on the ground, or I made a mess with this, or I'm whisking this out of control, or, whatever. And things just don't end up perfectly. And that's completely fine. You need to just be willing to understand that it's so much more enriching having them in the kitchen cooking with you, even if they're cutting something with their little plastic knife and it's totally like annihilated. That's completely fine, right? And so a lot of me finding my way to becoming a dad, like a dad who's active, has time, has all the responsibilities, has the legal responsibilities, all of those different things. A lot of that was done through the lens of cooking with my daughter. And that's really kind of where the book came from.
Boy, that story took a lot of turns, and so the actual inspiration is so varied. Thanks for sharing that. When you were just talking about including your kids and stepping back and allowing them to do things, to learn it on their own, with sort of limited guidance. I was just picturing so I have two daughters who are 11 and 8, and my 8-year-old has been really lately she got a cookbook for her birthday just recently, and she's been into making some recipes. So she's been setting her alarm and waking up early to do this, and which is awesome, and I'll get up early with her and kind of watch her do it and offer her any guidance that she needs. But it's difficult standing there and watching a kid do something and that they're either doing wrong or they're going to make a huge mess the way they're doing it and not saying anything. Like it really sort of tests your willpower to like interject, but it's also, like you said, so important that you don't always do that and allow them to fail, in a safe environment. And I think the other thing about including them in the process of cooking with you is that they're going to take so much more ownership over the food that's prepared and be excited to eat it and excited to share it with other people. And it's just such a great concept. In the foreword of the book, you write about always having an answer to the prompt, "Daddy, I'm hungry. I need a snack." And for me, I find that phrase especially when my 8-year-old daughter says it, I know that her instinct is to go to something that comes from a package and has a zillion ingredients, things that you can't pronounce. So that question, that's not even a question, it's a statement, is almost like a little triggering to me because I know what she's thinking about. I also know that she knows that I'm going to suggest something healthy, a fruit, a vegetable, something like that. And so it's always this game of like, well, what are you craving? And I want her to suggest the idea rather than sort of issuing what I feel is like a complaint. And so when you write about, having an answer to "Daddy, I'm hungry, I need a snack," how are you thinking about that? Is that that you've always got just a number of different things that you can offer that are healthy and balanced?
So I'm going to answer that in two parts, but one, I'll start with a cliche, which is, have you heard that saying, like, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail?
I have heard that.
Yeah, so that is so true. And in this instance, there's nothing more true, right? Like if you are not thinking about snack time, if you're not thinking about what breakfast is going to look like, you're not thinking about what pack lunch is going to look like, all those things, then you will succumb to the lowest denominator, which is like, cool, just get pizza at school. Cool, here's this bar with all the set ingredients that you don't want in it. Here's this bag of something. And look, I also don't want to say that there's not time and place for lowest common denominator.
Sure.
There is a time to break down and be like, you know what? McDonald's is the only option right now. That's what it is. Now, I don't plan to feed my kid McDonald's. It's just not a part of my plan. If anything, I'm taking her an In-N-Out burger. But recognizing that, like, hey, you have to plan and do the best you can. And then you need to know when to like not beat yourself up because nothing else is working out that day. And just, you know what, like if McDonald's is going to do the trick because you're on the road from a trip or whatever, and everybody's hungry and you don't want to be hard on yourself, like then just do it and get over it. Now, to answer the question like more specifically, right? Like in my view, you had talked about like, hey, not wanting to prescribe something for her. I kind of fall on the other side of that. Like to me, like that's my job. I'm telling her what is available to her. Now she can make a choice out of those things. So i.e., hey, you've got an orange, you've got an apple, you've got a banana, you've got a piece of cheese, you maybe have some slices of salami. You have to set whatever your parameters are and say, this is what I'm offering you now. And if they're like, well, can I have this other thing, which wasn't a part of the options? Well, that's not a part of the options today. And I'm also not saying that like candy's not ever on the docket, right? You know, and a lollipop is an option after you've eaten at an appropriate time. You're not having it before bed. You can have it sometime after breakfast. If you're not going to school that day, you can have it after lunch. You can have it after you've had a healthy snack, right? And those are kind of the parameters that I set. And for me, it's all about planning. It's all about making sure the house is full of things that I feel really good about, right? Like there's a lot of fruit options. There's a lot of snacks that don't have, we call them clean labels, right? Like, that don't have a million ingredients in the back that you can't read. And then knowing that when the thing comes up, which is like, hey, I'm hungry in between a mealtime and there's a snack, well, here are your options. You don't want one of those? Sorry to be a little old school for you, but
tough shit.
You're not hungry enough. Well, look, you're not hungry enough if you don't want one of those snacks.
Yeah.
I'm not offering you gruel.
Right.
I'm offering you a delicious crispy apple or a super juicy, delicious orange or a nice, cheddar cheese, right? Like, or some crackers with very few ingredients on them. Like those are your options right now.
Yeah. Well, I think that the easy answer then is like, I do list options, and it's usually, like you said, it's have an apple, have some grapes, or have some nuts, or have a cheese steak, whatever it is. I give a few options, but then I leave it open ended. And I think, to your point, you just don't leave it open ended. You say, here's the options of what you can have right now, and they're all great options, and they can choose one, or they can decide that they're not actually hungry and that they're just interested in having a snack for other reasons.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
And I think that's like a whole separate conversation. But I love that answer. It's just like you give a few great options, and those are the options.
Yeah, and look, like also, I do fall a little old school in my mentality, which is like I fall in the kind of category of like, you are there to tell your kids what to do. Now, there are times in life where you want them to make a choice. There are times where you want to prompt them. But like for me in my house, I don't ask kids what they want for dinner. They ask me, Daddy, what's for dinner? I'm going to tell you what's for dinner because I'm making it for all of us. We're not doing 4 separate meals. Now, granted, I know that my daughter vomits at the sight of shrimp unless they're deep fried. I'm not going to do that to her, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? But I'm not going to necessarily be like, cool, there's buttered noodles for you. There's this for you. We're all making meatballs together. Everybody's coming and helping form them. Everybody gets their hands involved in it. Everybody knows that it's going to be super delicious. But that's what's for dinner.
Yeah, I love that. I know that for those of us, yourself included, with younger kids especially, that time can be really tight and schedules can be really packed. And so I appreciate that in your cookbook, you've presented like 80 recipes, and many of them can be prepared in, around 45 minutes time. But you've also categorized the recipes into a few different groups. And I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. So obviously I think people think certain things are very daunting if they're not able to visualize it, or they get into something not realizing how daunting it actually can be. And I think it's good to know what you're getting into, right? So like we break the meals down into like the time and like what we call kind of like weekday options, like the weekend kind of like feast option, right? Like where it's like, hey, I've got all day. I'm going to make fresh pasta. This is a whole Italian nona's day, right? And the cooking is the activity, and we're really excited to be doing it, and that's awesome. But that's just not reasonable for a Wednesday night when you got soccer practice, you got jujitsu, and everybody needs to have dinner and so on and so forth. So we also try to categorize it in the amount of mess that you have to clean up, which I think is really a good thing to point out, right? Because if something takes 45 minutes, but I'm telling you to pull out 15 bowls and like all these different things and 2 different pans, well, that's going to be another 45 minutes of cleanup at the end, right? And so I like to try and let people know like, hey, look, this is truly a weeknight endeavor, right? Like there's your cutting board, there's a pot, and maybe there's a bowl and your knife. You get all this stuff going and you can do it all in one place. And then you've got dinner on the table in 45 minutes, right? Like, and to me, I think giving people visibility into that is really important, because when you're talking about a cookbook, it's meant to be a tool, right? It's not meant to be something that like completely throws you off your game. It's meant to be something that helps you succeed at what you're trying to do. And for me, right, success means that everyone is fed, everyone enjoyed what they ate, everyone participated in some way. Now, that can mean we cook together and you help peel carrots. That can mean that you help set the table. That can mean that you help clear the table. That could mean, at Nico's age when he's 14, like helping with the dishes, right? Like all of those things are participating. And for me, and a lot of the book's messaging is about recognizing that this is a family. We're a team, right? And this is a team sport. It's not all on dad. It's not all on mom. Everybody's got to come to the table. And the earlier you start that whole thing, and this is the big thing, even if it's not actually so helpful early on, you are setting a standard. You're setting a way that we do things in this house. That means when we're cooking and getting dinner ready, everyone's helping out. Even if that's not so helpful when you're 3 or 4, it does actually become helpful by the time they're 7 or 8.
And way easier to teach them early on and then improve upon those skills than to teach them from scratch when they're 8 years old.
Yeah.
Something that my wife and I deal with, especially again with our 8-year-old, and probably a lot of listeners deal with this with their kids, picky eaters. My daughter it's like, especially with vegetables, of course, but even stuff that like she's liked in the past, she'll just randomly decide, I don't like this anymore. I don't like salmon anymore. Mm-hmm. And it's been really difficult to get her to expand her horizons and be like slightly more adventurous with the food that she's eating. And we always, are offering a good variety, a balanced meal, but getting her to actually eat that is really hard. In the book, you share like tips like adding pasta sauce to vegetables. Any other tips for parents whose kids just really struggle to try new things?
Yeah, so like there's two kind of thought processes here. Number one is you're getting your kid nutrition, and you're not trying to make a point or a statement. You're just trying to infuse nutrition into their body. And so you don't care how that happens. The other one is creating a culture around eating things that are better for you or good for you. And that is a much more kind of tactical approach. See, so I'll answer both. The one about just like delivering nutrients, that's the kind of like, hey, the pasta sauce idea, or, things when you cut them up small enough and you put them into soups and stews, they're imperceivable, right? And you're just getting them into their diet. My fiance, her big thing is like when they have a smoothie in the morning, they're getting like, 12 or 15 leaves of spinach that they had no idea are in there, right? And they're being masked by a banana and blueberry and so on and so forth. But like they're getting in there. And my big thing is always protein, right? So it's like they're getting a scoop of protein in there. When they have pancakes, they're getting a scoop of protein into the pancakes. Like they may not perceive it, but that's what's happening, right? And so that's just a delivery mechanism of making sure that you're getting your kids the appropriate amount of nutritional value that they need. Now, the culture discussion, that one is always going to be way harder. And so there's a couple things. Number one is I know there's certain parents that frown on bribery. I'm not one of them. I'm like 100% all about bribery, right? Like you want dessert, this is what it takes. You want that episode of Bluey, this is what it takes. And understanding, by the way, the world has transactions, right? Like if you do the thing that you need to do, there's a positive outcome on the other end of that. So that's one of the things. The other thing is, look, like getting them involved truly will help. If they are cooking the vegetable, if they're stripping the vegetable, I know that like this is, very unattainable for a lot of people, but I moved to the suburbs specifically so I could have a garden. I'm telling you, if you have the ability, even in a pot, like I have friends that live in the city, they just have a pot where they'll grow like one or two things in there, like herbs or something like that. And they let their kids go cut them. And then their kids will taste them, right? They'll do like a tomato plant during the summer, right? And their kids love popping tomatoes in their mouth. This is not by accident, right? These are things that like if the kids get to participate. So I would also say like, hey, take your kids to the farmer's market. If you don't have a farmer's market, take your kids to the grocery store. Get them involved in picking things and carrying things and putting them in the bag and the whole thing, the whole process. Then when you get home with the asparagus, right, there can be a game around peeling the asparagus or popping off the bottoms. Like, hey, like, oh, I bet you won't taste it raw. Like, I'll taste it raw. Like, will you taste it raw? And then getting them involved. Oh, when it's raw, it just tastes crunchy and it doesn't have like a weird flavor. Oh, okay, cool. Like, let's roast it. Also, textures are super important to kids. If they get something that's super soft and mushy, they're not going to like it. So remembering that like a crunchier texture usually wins kids over better, right? So with asparagus, cooking them very quickly, hot, pulling them off quickly so they have a crunch to them. And at least for my kids, right, like lemon is the answer, right? If you put a lot of lemon on it, then you taste it. They're like, oh, you love lemon, right? Like taste this. Oh, you want to have a little bite? So getting them involved in that sense, getting them to try it in different stages, getting them to touch it. So it's like when they have a fear of something or a phobia of something, the closer you get them to it in like an innocuous way, the fear and phobia starts to soften. And then all of a sudden they're like right next to their fear or phobia. And they're like, whoa, how'd I get here? It's like, well, you didn't just jump straight into that. You got shades, like removed into the point where you're like, oh, now I'm eating asparagus. Like my daughter won't let me get the plate of asparagus out of the kitchen without grabbing them and eating them because she's realized that they're crunchy and delicious and they taste like olive oil, salt, and lemon. So I think that's a part of it. And like turning it into little like adventures and bets and challenges like, hey, like, will you taste a crunchy, delicious bell pepper in return for the snack? And getting them to be like, oh, okay, like maybe I'll take a bite. Because the fact of the matter is, if they taste a really good bell pepper, they're going to like it, right? If they're not going to be like, oh my God, this is the worst thing I've ever tasted. Very unlikely that that's going to be the case. And so you kind of ease into stuff like that, right? Like the big kind of like no word with my daughter is saying salad. She's like, I don't like salad. I'm like, okay, great. But like, here's these cut vegetables on your plate. And she's like, oh yeah, that's fine. Those are just vegetables. And I'm like, cool. Like, do you want some lemon on them? And she's like, yeah, I'll have lemon. I'm like, would you like some olive oil on them? She's like, yeah. I'm like, you like salad.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my shtick on like, look, and by the way, there's also going to be those kids that are just impossible with this, right? And, when your kid is super picky and won't taste anything, won't try anything, and you've tried everything, like you're eating this or you're going to bed hungry or, there's not going to be any snacks. There's not going to be this. There's not going to be screen time. Like, and it just doesn't work. Look, that is what it is. And you hope that that's something that you can work with over time. I was a very picky kid when I was younger. But it's just about creating something that works for both of you, right? Like mac and cheese for every meal doesn't work for me. Now, there's a brand of mac and cheese that I found that I really like. It's called Goodles. And it's like basically got all these like additional proteins in there. And there's like all these, the flour sources are all vegetable flours, right? So it's like, and then the cheese is all done with like, there's all these ingredients. It's got like a clean label. And then my daughter loves them. Right. And she doesn't perceive them as being like the healthy option. They're just, they're just the mac and cheese option she likes. So that's the thing for me. I'm like, okay, cool. When we're doing mac and cheese, you're doing that. And I don't feel terrible about it. But then my kind of thing is like, cool, you can have mac and cheese, but you're going to have protein. So you decide what your protein is. Do you want like, a Polish sausage cut up in there? Do you want some Italian sausage fried up in there? Do you want a piece of grilled chicken on the side? Do you want some steak? Whatever it is. But my thing that I'm always hammering home is like, you need to have protein. So I think, there's not a perfect answer, but like there's a million different approaches. And I think with taking a million different approaches, you start to eat away at the edges and then you get to somewhere better than you were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, listening to you throw out all these ideas for how to add protein or how to add flavors, like obviously you have the benefit of your experience, right? Your years of experience doing this and just instinctually knowing how I can elevate this recipe. But I think for a lot of parents who don't have that experience, what your cookbook does is gives them this really easily accessible toolkit. So when they think about, like, they may not ever think to grab a lemon and squeeze some juice in, with these vegetables. Or even if they do, it's like, well, is it just squeezing lemon juice or do I have to add something else? Do you have to add like a butter with it, or what could make this better and not just like sour and offensive to my kid? And so you've given them this amazing tool book with so many great recipes. I'm so excited. I think it's going to be hugely successful for you. Do you have a favorite recipe that you and Elena like to make together?
We make the cupcakes. We call in the book, they're called cuppy cakes because when she was younger, she called them cuppy cakes.
Perfect.
Which I never used to make cupcakes ever. I've never made cupcakes before. There was a time that I wanted to make cupcakes for her birthday, right? I love that. Probably the thing that is like the biggest crowd pleaser and gets everyone involved and everyone loves is the meatballs, right? And so spaghetti and meatball night at my house is always a win. And it's great because it's very tactile, right? Like all the kids get to like mush the meatballs and they get to participate and then they watch us cook the pomodoro, right? And so for example, like my daughter, she sees the basil leaves and she's like, oh, I don't want that. I'm like, okay, well, the basil leaves are there. And so if you want to not eat them, that's up to you, but I'm not removing them for you. And I'm not playing this game of like, oh, there's nothing green in there. Like if you don't want to eat them, totally up to you. But eventually she ends up eating them and liking them. And it's just kind of a hodgepodge, right? And so spaghetti and meatballs is a huge win in our house. Anytime we make chicken soup in our house, especially during like cold and flu season, and we make big pots of it and we make it often, that's usually a big win as well. And my daughter loves helping with that.
Has she expressed interest in your line of work? Do you think she'll go into something culinary?
Yeah. So like every month or two, it changes, right? Like, so, at the beginning of kindergarten, it was like, I want to be a chef. A couple months later, it was like, I want to be a teacher. Now it's a scientist. So I really, when she goes to sleep every night, I whisper in her ear that she's going to get into finance.
There you go. There you go. Parents listening, I'll put links to all of David's social media handles in our episode notes. I highly recommend that you pre-order Dad What's for Dinner. You can do that anywhere online. If you're hearing the episode after the end of May 2025, then walk into a local bookstore and try to purchase it or ask them to order it for you. But just get your hands on a copy. And if you're in the Bay Area, plan to visit David's restaurant, Chez Fico, and after you've had an awesome meal, tell David how much you loved his Modern Dadhood episode, all right? David, thank you so much for the awesome chat. It was really great meeting you.
Thank you so much.
Adam.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, great interview.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Second of all, you and I have talked a little bit off mic about a new segment.
Mm-hmm.
We call this new segment, How Would You Dad This?
Do we have a jingle for it?
We do. Go ahead and roll it.
We don't, but hopefully by the time this episode airs, we will.
Yeah, maybe we will.
How would you dad this?
Here's the idea. It's not that complicated. One of us will just peel back the curtain, tell a quick story about a thing that happened. Maybe we're questioning the choices that we made as the dad in the situation, but nevertheless, that's how it panned out. The results were the results. But you sort of think to yourself sometimes coming out of these, like, did I make all the right moves? Did I make all the right choices? And so the idea here is we'll convey said story and ask the listeners, how would you dad this? If you were in this situation, how would you have dadded your way through it?
So it's not necessarily like an instant regret. It's just this could have played out a few different ways. Here's the path I took. What's another way that maybe could have yielded a more desirable outcome?
Would love to hear from the listeners. How might you have handled this same situation?
Okay. Inaugural, how would you dad this? Let's have it.
And I decided to give it a title. Should we give each one of these a title?
Absolutely.
This, how would you dad this, is entitled, Can you make me some eggs?
Okay. Is that a kid voice? Or is that your voice?
That was a kid voice. Okay. This is what happened. For the 5th day in a row, I had a sick child at home. It was strep throat. And this is the child. Frequent listeners of the show might know that one of my kids in particular gets really knocked down by strep throat.
With frequency.
Yes. It was a whole thing. So, but anyway, on this day, it was mid-morning. The sicko in question is upstairs in his room. I'm making breakfast, finally, for me and the missus. She's already at her desk working and actually on the phone with her boss. And I should be working, but breakfast. So I run upstairs and I ask my son, would you like some eggs while I'm at it? And he shakes his head. I said, are you sure, buddy? I'll make a cheesy eggs. He shakes his head. No. So I hoof it back downstairs. I fry up some eggs. I put them on an English muffin because we're a very fancy household. Throw a plate down on my wife's desk. Put all the things away. I kind of like to tidy up as I go. All the eggs are gone. Pans are away. Everything's done. I'm sitting now at the table. As the pan continues to cool, my child just appears behind me. That smells really good. Can I have some eggs? Now, I'm late for work. My wife is still on the phone. I'm hungry. I love my child. I'm perpetually tired. My lease is up on my car. The lights have been flickering all morning because it's windy outside. We haven't washed our bed sheets in God knows how long. My dog has a weird cyst on his foot. We're not sure what to do about that. And all I really want out of life is to sit down and play Minecraft. And so the great spiraling sort of begins. And I say, no, not right now. And before I can even get the rest of my sentence out, which would be, but once I'm done eating, I'll make you some eggs. The whining winds up. The stomping starts. The pouting picks up. The grumbling grows. See what I'm doing there?
Oh, yeah.
It's alliteration.
Yep.
But I'm sticking to my guns. I gave him the chance. He didn't take it. So I sit down. I take a big ass sloppy bite of my sandwich. And I question all of my decisions.
Yeah.
And the spiraling continues.
Yep. I don't blame you for how you handled that. I don't blame. Well, aside from maybe the big sloppy bite, which is just sort of pouring salt in the wound. It's a little
right in the eyes.
What's the word? Gratuitous, maybe?
Yeah. I looked him right in the eyes.
Yeah.
When I took that bite. Listeners, how would you dad this?
Let's see how our listeners respond. And that brings us to the end.
This is it.
Hey, as we get into these ending credits, we should say this episode will come out on Friday, whatever that is, Friday the 28th. You and I will be in Chicago the following week for Podcast Movement Conference. And if any other podcasters listening will be there, any listeners will be there for any reason, we'd love to see you. Track us down. Use the app. You can find us. Contact us. Let's have some coffee together.
We'll be the two guys that look like maybe we're actually just one guy.
We're like the two-headed monster from Sesame Street. Parents, thank you so much for spending some time with us. As I said at the top, all episodes are available at moderndadhood.com and on all the podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Hark Audio,
Pocket Cast,
iHeart, Overcast, Amazon Music, all of them.
Podfeld.
Food Pod. Leave a review, please, if you like the show. And also tell a friend. Word of mouth goes such a long way. Text somebody this episode who you know could benefit from the wisdom of David Nayfeld. Marc, why don't you tell them what they can do on our website?
Hey, if you go to our website, which is moderndadhood.com, you can also find a little shop where we've got some Modern Dad hoodies and some t-shirts. They make fantastic gifts for anyone you love, which could be yourself. You should love yourself.
Self-love.
There's also a form at the bottom that you can fill out if you want to send us a note. But you could also send us a note via electronic mail to hey, H-E-Y, at moderndadhood.com. You can find us on all the socials. Did you say that part yet?
Nope. Instagram.
Mr. Oh, I said that.
Facebook, TikTok, YouTube,
X.
LinkedIn. We're not on
I don't
X.
think we're on X anymore. I think that's.
But anywhere else, pretty much.
But all the other ones, YouTube. Check out the YouTubes. We're doing some fun stuff over there.
Thank you to Casper Baby Pants and to Spencer Albee for the music in Modern Dadhood. Thank you to Chef David Nayfeld for the fruitful conversation. And Marc Andrew Checket.
Thank you for listening.